She stood at the edge of the wooden platform, her hands twisting the worn leather strap of her travel bag as the iron wheels of the train screeched to a stop, steam billowing in clouds that curled around her skirts like ghostly fingers. And with every hiss of the engine, her heart pounded harder in her chest because this was the moment she had dreaded. Since the letter came weeks ago, the moment she would meet the man she was bound to marry, a man whose reputation had been whispered about in every parlor and every church pew back east, a man, they said, was hard as the desert sun, cruel as the winter wind, a cowboy with no patience for gentleness or mercy. And though she had prayed that fate would somehow spare her, here she was, stepping down into a world of dust and grit with no family near, no friend to lean on, and no escape but through the mercy of the stranger she was told to call husband. The town seemed to hold its breath as she appeared, men tipping their hats, women casting glances full of curiosity and pity, children peeking from behind aprons. And somewhere in the silence came the sharp sound of boots on wood, steady, unhurried, echoing like the beat of a drum, until she lifted her eyes and saw him coming toward her. He was taller than she imagined, broad-shouldered, the brim of his hat casting his face in shadow, but even so she could see the strength in his jaw, the lines etched deep by sun and time. And though his expression was unreadable, she braced herself for the cold command she expected, the clipped tone of ownership she feared. But instead, he stopped just before her, removed his hat with a respectful nod, and in a voice low and steady said the words she never thought she would hear. "I'll be kind." For a heartbeat the world tilted. The dust motes hung still in the air, and she could not speak, only stare at him as though she had misheard. But his gaze did not waver, and his hand, rough from ranch work, extended not with demand but with invitation, and she felt her knees weaken with relief and confusion, because kindness was the one thing she had given up hope for. He took her bag without asking, lifted it as though it weighed nothing, and guided her from the platform, with a quiet assurance that steadied her trembling steps, and as they walked, she caught the scent of leather and clean sweat and horses, a scent that was foreign yet oddly grounding. And she dared to wonder if all the tales she'd heard had been lies, or if perhaps he was not the monster, but the man who had been misunderstood. The ride out of town was long and silent, the wagon wheels rolling over rocky trails, the horizon stretching wide and endless, and she watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the way he handled the reins with patience, the way he clicked softly to the horse instead of snapping, the way his eyes softened when they passed a cluster of wildflowers by the roadside. And slowly her fear began to loosen its grip. When he finally spoke again, his words surprised her. "You're far from home," he said gently, and she nodded, her voice catching as she whispered that she had no home now, that everything she had known was gone. And for the first time since she left, tears filled her eyes, spilling over despite her efforts to hold them back. He did not mock her or tell her to be strong. Instead, he slowed the horse, handed her a clean handkerchief, and let her cry, his silence carrying more comfort than words could. At the ranch, she expected cold walls and harsher rules, but what greeted her was a tidy home, weathered yet cared for, with a porch that overlooked rolling hills and fences mended with steady hands. And when he helped her down, he said simply, "This is yours now too, and for the first time." She felt a flicker of belonging. The days that followed were unlike anything she had been prepared for. She rose early, learning to help in the kitchen, to gather eggs, to mend clothes, and each time she stumbled, instead of anger he offered patience, teaching her with calm steadiness, his voice never raising, his eyes never hardening. And though the land was rugged, though storms rolled in fierce and wild, though the work was backbreaking, the shadow of cruelty never fell on her, and she began to trust that perhaps his promise to be kind was no passing whim. There were moments when she caught him watching her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine, not of fear, but of something she could not yet name. And at night, when she lay awake listening to the crickets and the wind, she wondered if she had been brought not to a life of chains, but to a life she could build anew. Yet whispers in town still followed them. Women warning her to guard her heart, men hinting at a past he never spoke of. And she wrestled with questions, torn between the kindness she experienced daily and the stories that painted him as dangerous. One evening, when the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, she found him repairing a fence alone, sweat glistening on his brow, and she gathered the courage to ask, "Why do they call you cruel?" He paused, leaned on the post, and looked at her with eyes that held storms and secrets. And then he said, "Because out here, you have to be hard to survive. But hard doesn't mean unkind. I made mistakes. I fought when I shouldn't have. I closed myself off when people needed me. Maybe I earned the name. But with you, I want something different." Her heart ached at the honesty, at the vulnerability he shared without pride or excuse. And in that moment, she realized that kindness was not weakness, that strength could be gentle, and that perhaps she had been brought here not to suffer, but to heal. As the stars rose over the prairie, she felt hope stirring like the first light of dawn, fragile yet fierce, and she dared to believe that this unexpected marriage could become more than survival. It could become love. And friends, if this story touched your heart and you want to hear more, tales of courage, redemption, and unexpected love, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Because every story we share here will remind you that even in the harshest lands, kindness can bloom and love can change everything. The days slipped into weeks, and though she had once measured her life by the ticking of clocks in parlors and the tolling of bells in city churches, now she measured time by the rising of the sun, the crowing of roosters, the scent of fresh hay, and the steady rhythm of boots across the wooden floor. And slowly the prairie became less foreign, its wild expanse less threatening, its silence less lonely, for beside her walked the man who had promised kindness, and so far he had not broken that promise. Still, questions gnawed at the edges of her peace like wolves circling in the dark. She wondered if his patience could endure the weight of hardships that were sure to come, if his temper would flare when life pressed too hard, if the past he kept hidden would rise like a storm and drown the fragile hope blooming between them. She rose before dawn, fumbling with chores she had never known back east. Her hands blistered by the pump handle, her skirts dusted with straw, and sometimes she caught herself smiling, surprised by the satisfaction of work that left her bone-weary but proud. And each time she faltered, he was there, steady as the earth beneath her feet, guiding her hands with his, showing her how to tie a rope, how to saddle a horse, how to gather eggs without cracking the shells. And though his touch was brief, the warmth of it lingered, stirring feelings she had not dared to name. One evening, when the air was cool and the sky was painted in hues of violet and gold, they sat together on the porch, the silence between them not heavy but companionable, broken only by the creak of the rocking chair and the distant call of a coyote. And she asked softly, "Do you ever regret it? Bringing me here, making this choice?" His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon for a long moment before he turned to her and said, "No, I regret many things, but not you." The words struck deep, and she pressed them to her heart as though they were a promise she could keep forever. Yet life on the ranch was not without trials. Storms came, fierce and unrelenting, pounding rain that turned the ground to mud, winds that tore at the roof and rattled the windows. And once, when lightning split the sky, the barn caught fire, flames leaping high into the night. She remembered the terror that clawed at her chest as neighbors rushed to help, men shouting, women praying. And through the smoke she saw him, fearless and relentless, fighting the fire with every ounce of strength, his shirt singed, his arms blackened with soot. And when it was over, when the barn still stood, though scarred, he collapsed to his knees, coughing, and she ran to him without thinking, her hands on his face, her tears streaking the ash, whispering his name again and again as though her voice could anchor him to life. He looked at her then, his eyes bloodshot yet fierce, and in a hoarse whisper said, "Don't cry, darling. I told you I'll be kind. I'll always come back to you." From that night on, something shifted between them. He was no longer just the man she had been given to, but the man her heart began to claim, the man whose strength did not crush but protected, whose silence did not distance but sheltered. And she began to feel safe in a way she never had before. But the past has long arms, and whispers in town grew louder, rumors of a feud, of blood spilled in years gone by, of enemies who had not forgotten nor forgiven. And though she wanted to dismiss them, she could not ignore the shadow that crossed his face when certain names were mentioned. One afternoon, when he rode into town for supplies, She followed, determined to learn the truth. And at the mercantile, she overheard two men talking, their voices sharp with disdain as they spoke his name, calling him ruthless, accusing him of leaving a man broken after a fight over land and cattle. Her stomach twisted and doubt crept in, clawing at the fragile trust she had built. And when he returned to her side, carrying a sack of flour as though it weighed nothing, she searched his eyes looking for cruelty, but found only weariness and a quiet strength that begged her to believe in him. That night she asked him directly, her voice trembling but steady, "What is it they say about you? Is it true?" He did not flinch, did not grow angry. Instead, he sat beside her, removed his hat, and let out a long breath before answering. "Once I let pride rule me. I fought a man, not just with fists but with fury, and though I didn't kill him, I might as well have. He lost everything that day, and I've carried that weight ever since. They call me cruel because of what I did, because I didn't look back. But I've spent every day since, trying to be better than that man I was." Her heart ached with the confession, torn between fear of his past and faith in his present, and after a long silence, she placed her hand over his, whispering, "We are not just what we were. We are what we choose to be now." His fingers tightened around hers, rough and strong yet trembling ever so slightly, and in that moment she knew he needed her forgiveness as much as she needed his kindness, and that their union, though forged by necessity, could become something sacred if they both dared to keep walking forward. As the seasons turned, they grew closer, their laughter echoing through the house, their shoulders brushing during chores, their gazes lingering longer, and though no grand declarations were spoken, the bond between them deepened like roots sinking into rich soil. She found herself waiting for the sound of his boots at the door, for the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, and once when she fell ill with fever, she woke to find him by her side, cool cloth in hand, his face etched with worry, whispering prayers into the night as though her life was the most precious thing he had ever held. When she recovered, he did not speak of it, but she knew then, without a doubt, that his kindness was not a mask, but the truest part of him, and her heart surrendered fully, no longer bound by fear, but lifted by love. And friends, if this chapter gripped your heart and made you believe in the power of redemption and love, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more stories are coming that will remind you that even in the harshest deserts of life, kindness and love can bloom like wildflowers after the rain.